He had everything: money, power, and fear. Alexander Voss was the name whispered in boardrooms and feared in courtrooms, a man whose empire reached into every corner of business. He didn't just win deals, he broke competitors. Ruthless, calculated, untouchable. And yet, beneath the cold layers of success, there was something else. Boredom. A kind of emptiness that no luxury car, penthouse, or merger could fill. It was on a rainy Thursday night, during a private poker game with 3 other billionaires, that the bet was made. The stakes were ridiculous, not in money, but in ego. "I bet you couldn't stay married for a year," one of them said, laughing over a glass of aged scotch. Alexander smirked. "I could marry the first woman I see tomorrow and make it work." "Really?" another billionaire asked. "Just the first woman who crosses your path?" He leaned back in his chair. "Yes, I'll do it." The room went quiet, before erupting in laughter. But Alexander didn't laugh. He meant it. That night the terms were sealed. No background checks, no setup, just fate. And by morning, he would walk into the street, find the first woman he encountered, and ask her to marry him. No one expected him to follow through, but they didn't know what he had already lost. The next morning, Alexander woke early. No assistants, no security team. Just him, a coat, and the city. He stepped out of his penthouse and began walking. No destination in mind. The bet played in his mind like a strange melody. Marry the first woman he saw. Not out of love, not out of interest. Just because he could. It was absurd. Reckless. And yet, it was the first time in years he felt awake. Then he saw her, standing outside a small bookshop, trying to protect a tray of pastries from the rain. She was young, but not fragile. Hair messy in the wind, wearing a mismatched sweater and boots. She balanced the tray with one hand and pushed the door open with her elbow. A small laugh escaped her lips when she nearly dropped one of the muffins. Alexander stopped. She was ordinary, utterly, beautifully ordinary. And that's why he walked up to her. She looked at him, startled. "Can I help you?" "Yes," he said calmly. "I need you to marry me." Her eyes widened. "I'm sorry?" "I'm serious. No tricks, no lies. I'll explain everything. Just give me 10 minutes. She stared at him, somewhere between shocked and amused. 10 minutes then. He had no idea her name was Claire, or that she was about to change his life. They sat across from each other in the tiny bookshop cafe, surrounded by the smell of paper and cinnamon. Claire raised an eyebrow as she stirred her tea. "So, you're telling me you're doing this because of a bet?" Alexander nodded without shame. "Yes, but I'm offering something real in return. A full legal marriage. 1 year. I'll support you, protect you, give you anything you want. After 1 year, we part ways, no strings." Claire laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was bold and full of disbelief. "You're insane." "Probably. And rich?" "Very." She leaned back in her chair. "So what happens if I say no?" "Nothing. I walk away. You never see me again." "And if I say yes?" "You become my wife. For 1 year. Then you leave a very wealthy woman." Claire studied him for a long time. He was serious. Too serious. But there was something underneath all that control. A flicker of loneliness, perhaps. Or curiosity. "I work 2 jobs," she said. "My student loans are a disaster. I haven't had a real vacation in 6 years." He said nothing, waiting. Claire reached for her tea. "Okay, let's get married." Alexander blinked. For once, he was the one caught off guard. The wedding happened in secret that same week. No cameras, no guests. Just a quiet civil ceremony. A lawyer and a judge who clearly had questions but wisely didn't ask them. Claire wore a plain white dress she borrowed from a friend. Alexander wore the same suit he wore to negotiations. They signed the papers, shook hands, and walked out as husband and wife. And just like that, the bet became real. He moved her into a smaller apartment within one of his buildings. Not the penthouse, but not modest either. She got her own key, her own privacy, and no obligations. except to show up twice a month for a public event or a charity function. Appearances mattered, but otherwise she was free. They didn't share a bed or a schedule. Claire continued working at the bookshop, refusing to live like a trophy. Alexander didn't argue. In fact, he admired it. But something strange began to happen. She challenged him. She told him when he was being cold, when his jokes weren't funny, when he needed to listen. And he did. Slowly, the feared billionaire began to change, and so did Claire. Months passed. What started as an absurd arrangement began to evolve. Claire, who once rolled her eyes at the idea of wealth, started to understand the man behind it. Alexander, always in control, found himself waiting for her texts. She never asked for anything. Not jewelry, not status, not access to his empire. And that made her even more intriguing. They shared dinners, at first because they had to. Then because they wanted to. Claire cooked, Alexander cleaned. They debated books, argued about movies, laughed at each other's awkwardness. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was real. Then came the night she got sick. A fever, a hospital trip. Nothing serious, but Claire didn't call anyone, not even her parents, except Alexander. He arrived in 10 minutes, out of breath, without a coat. He sat by her bedside all night, reading her favorite book out loud when she couldn't sleep. She watched him in the quiet dark and realized something terrifying. She didn't want the year to end. And Alexander, holding her hand without even realizing it, felt the same. By the 6th month, whispers began to spread. The media had caught on. The mysterious woman married to Alexander Voss. Rumors flew, a secret heiress, a scandal, a revenge plot. But none of it was true. Claire remained grounded, refusing to play the role of billionaire wife. Yet their appearances together grew warmer, more natural. He smiled more. She leaned into him, sometimes without thinking. One evening, after a fundraiser, they returned to the apartment. She kicked off her heels and groaned. "If one more person asks if I'm pregnant, I swear—" Alexander laughed, genuinely, deeply. Claire blinked. Was that a laugh? He poured her a glass of wine. "It happens. Rarely." She sat beside him on the couch. "You know what's weird?" "What?" "I don't hate this life. I thought I would, but it's peaceful. With you." He looked at her, not at her dress or her posture, but into her. "It's peaceful for me too." They didn't kiss, but something was spoken between them that night. Something no vow had covered. Something deeper than the contract. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned. But no good story unfolds without its conflict. A month later, Claire received a message from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Her ex-boyfriend, Tyler. The one who left her in debt and pieces. The one who said she'd never make it without him. And now he was back. He claimed he wanted to catch up, but the moment she met him for coffee, she knew it was a mistake. Tyler wasn't interested in closure. He was interested in headlines. He had seen the wedding announcement. He had seen the press. And he wanted in. "You really married that Voss guy?" he asked, sipping his overpriced espresso. "What's the angle? You getting a payout?" Claire stood up, her voice firm. "There is no angle. I married a man who respected me, something you never did." But Tyler didn't stop. The next day, tabloids printed a photo of them at the cafe, with headlines spinning lies. Claire's secret past, the truth behind the billionaire marriage. It was everywhere, and Alexander saw it. Claire came home to find the apartment empty. No note, no message, just silence. Hours passed. Finally, Alexander returned. His face was unreadable. "We need to talk." She sat down, bracing herself. "I saw the photo," he said. "The headlines. I know, it's not what it looks like. He showed up out of nowhere. I made a mistake meeting him." He raised a hand. "I'm not angry about the coffee." She stopped. "I'm angry that you didn't call me. You didn't think I could handle the truth?" She blinked. "You've never let anyone close enough to handle anything." The words hung in the air. He sat beside her, his voice lower. "I'm scared, Claire. I didn't think I could feel this much again." You were supposed to be a bet, and now." She reached for his hand. "And now?" He looked into her eyes. "Now I don't care about the bet. I just don't want to lose you." She squeezed his hand. "Then don't." From that day forward, everything changed. They stopped pretending. The guards stopped watching. The press faded as newer scandals took their place. But inside their apartment, something real began to bloom. Claire moved fully into his world, but on her terms. She kept working. He started reading fiction. They took late-night walks. They argued over politics and playlists. They even adopted a stray cat that clawed every suit he owned. One evening, while making dinner together, Claire turned to him. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" He paused. "Wednesday? It's been 1 year. Since the day you asked me to marry you on the street." He dropped the spoon. 1 year, he repeated. "Already?" She nodded. "Which means our contract is complete." Alexander didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the drawer, pulled out the original marriage agreement, and without a word tore it in half. Claire stared. "What are you doing?" "I'm rewriting it," he said softly, this time without a deadline. He didn't propose with diamonds. He didn't arrange fireworks or orchestras. He simply looked her in the eyes and said, "I love you. Not because of a bet, not because of a game, but because somehow you walked into my life and made me human again." She smiled, tears gathering. "I love you too, even when you're unbearable." He laughed. "That's fair." They remarried 6 months later, this time with friends, music, and a dress Claire chose just for herself. The media barely noticed. There was no press release. Just 2 people dancing under string lights, surrounded by people who had watched them go from strangers to soulmates. No contracts, no rules. Just love. Years passed. Alexander stepped back from his empire, placing it into trusted hands. He didn't miss the boardrooms or the headlines. He missed nothing at all because he finally had peace. Claire published her first book, a memoir disguised as fiction about a woman who marries a stranger on a dare and finds something she never expected, herself. It became a quiet bestseller. They moved to the countryside, where wildflowers grew freely and nobody cared about last names. On clear mornings, they made pancakes. On rainy afternoons, they played chess. On every anniversary, they visited the same bookshop cafe where it all began. Sometimes they laughed about the bet. Sometimes they didn't mention it at all. One afternoon, while tending the garden, Claire found Alexander asleep in a hammock, their cat curled on his chest. The sun painted golden streaks across his face. She smiled and sat beside him, brushing a leaf from his hair. He stirred and opened his eyes. "What time is it?" "Time to be happy," she whispered. He chuckled. "I think we finally figured that part out." She kissed his forehead. All it took was one ridiculous bet. He pulled her close. "No, all it took was you." And in the quiet rustle of trees and wind, the feared billionaire finally rested, not in power or control, but in the arms of a woman he never expected to love. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the hills, Claire received a letter addressed only to Mrs. Voss. It came from a private firm, the same one that had drawn up their original marriage contract. Inside, she found a copy of that first agreement, preserved and framed. Below it, a handwritten note from one of Alexander's closest legal advisors. He always kept this on his desk. Said it was the best contract he ever signed. Not because it made him money, but because it cost him everything he didn't need. Claire held the frame to her chest and sat quietly, surrounded by silence and the gentle ticking of a nearby clock. The man she had once thought was incapable of love had shown her the deepest version of it, not through grand gestures, but through the humility of change. She smiled, remembering the version of herself from that rainy day outside the bookstore. The girl who had laughed when a stranger in a suit asked her to marry him. The woman who had said yes without knowing it would be the bravest thing she'd ever do. Claire began to share her story in small ways. Not in interviews or tell-all books, but in conversations with young women who walked into her shop unsure of themselves. She told them that love doesn't always arrive in a bouquet or on a white horse. Sometimes it walks up to you with a ridiculous offer, wrapped in arrogance and mystery, and dares you to say yes. Not every risk is worth taking, but some are. She became a mentor without meaning to. A quiet example of what it means to stay soft without being weak, to forgive without forgetting, and to let someone in even when you're scared. Alexander, meanwhile, spent more and more time doing things he never thought he'd care about, planting herbs, painting fences, even learning how to fix old clocks. It wasn't about slowing down. It was about waking up to a life he had never allowed himself to live. They built a home, not from stone and money, but from laughter, second chances, and quiet mornings. When Claire found Alexander standing in the garden one foggy morning, staring out over the mist-covered hills, she asked, "What are you thinking about?" He turned to her, older now but still sharp in the eyes. "That I almost missed all of this. That I almost let ego keep me from peace." She walked to his side. "And now?" He took her hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Now I understand that the real bet wasn't whether I could marry someone. It was whether I was brave enough to become someone worth loving." She squeezed his hand and leaned her head on his shoulder. They stood there in silence, not needing to say another word. Because after everything, the chaos, the headlines, the absurdity of how it began, what mattered most was how it ended. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with power, but with presence. Sometimes the love stories that seem the most unlikely are the ones that last forever. Because when two people choose each other, not just once, but every day, that's no longer a bet. That's a promise. If this story moved you, leave a in the comments. And tell us, have you ever taken a leap that changed your life forever? We're listening, and your story might just be the next miracle waiting to be told.